Okay, so for this video, I'm going to look at what are my thoughts on the new Pelagos 39 compared to the Black Bay 58. I'm going to look at three different things for this. We're going to look at looks. Bear in mind, this is very subjective. It's going to be based on my personal opinion. Other people have different opinions, okay, and different preferences. So just bear that in mind. This is what I like from watches. Comfort and features I'll do together, and then we'll do a conclusion. I'm actually going to do the bigger Pelagos in a separate video because otherwise I think this will go on for too long. So for looks, I'll just go through the Black Bay 58 first, and then the Pelagos, and I will just put in some pictures of my old blue Black Bay 58 as we go through, because I don't have it anymore. The first thing I'll say is I will be focusing on the blue model of the 58. I did own both, but my preference was for the blue model, and that's very simple. I prefer a modern aesthetic to a watch, and I'll put in a picture of the original and the blue side by side, and I had them both at the same time and chose the blue. I didn't really go for the gilt and the kind of faux age creamy lume of the original 58, so for the purposes of this video, it will be against the blue 58 and not the original 58. And the first thing I'd also like to say is the blue 58 is an absolutely stunning watch. You'll see that in the video where I sold it to go towards the purchase of my car, I didn't want to sell it. It's a fantastic, go anywhere, do anything, a really nice looking watch. I've mentioned many times with this, I love blue dials. It was between that and my IWC at the time, and that was the exact amount of money. My IWC was newer. So yeah, I just want to say I do really like the blue 58. I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact it is just blue and white with silver details around the hands and the markers, and it was a fantastic watch, and it was comfy. Once I'd got the clasp drill to have an extra hole in it, I could get a decent fit. Okay, that being said, let's get on with it. The snowflake hands and the round hour plots on the 58 are a bit at odds. Obviously you can see on this watch the snowflake hands and the square markers just make more sense because it's a similar shape. It never bothered me, and it still doesn't bother me, but if you're being picky, which we need to be as watch collectors or watch enthusiasts, then that is one area that I could easily see people saying, yeah, that's not quite right, and you get over it, it's not a big problem, but it is something you notice for sure. I also think the Black Bay 58 feels the dial better than this watch. You can see again, people do talk about there being quite a lot of black space, and there is. So I think the 58 does feel the dial better than this watch, and as a result, proportionally, it looks a bit more compact, and yeah, I just think that works better on the Black Bay 58. While I didn't mind the fake rivets on the 58, my preference would always be not to have them. If they're functional and they're actually doing something, I get it. If you want to make it properly vintage but with modern materials, make them actual rivets. But having something on a watch, it's like having fake air vents on a car. That is a huge pet peeve of mine, or fake exhaust tips. Anything like that, it winds me up. So as I say, it didn't really bother me, but my absolute preference would be not to have the fake rivets on the bracelet. I would say that the 58 look is quite refined. Everything about it it's kind of vintage inspired, as we all know. It's got some polishing, it's got brushing. You can wear that happily in all occasions. It's the perfect size for the majority of wrists, especially mine at 7 inches. So it's a very versatile, very refined watch, and that is definitely plays in its favour. Yeah, they're lovely watches. There's absolutely no question about that. So moving on to the Pelagos 39. This does wear bigger, slightly bigger than the 58. The main reason being it's actually 40 millimeters in diameter when you take into consideration the bezel. You've also got the crown guards, and then you have the lug width, which is 21mm. So overall that adds up, and this wears slightly bigger on your wrists. For me, with a slightly bigger wrists, that just means it wears slightly better than the 58, although I wouldn't say the 58 wears badly at all. As I've said earlier, and on my previous videos, it wears very well on my wrist, but this watch just fills out my wrist a little bit more. So if you are thinking about that, this watch does wear ever so slightly bigger than the 58 on your wrist for those reasons mentioned. I will also say, I will add a picture in here. They do wear their thickness quite differently. This definitely takes its cues from the modern Submariners. So on the 58, I reckon these have got, I haven't got it with me unfortunately, but the same, I'd hazard a guess they've got exactly the same case dimensions in terms of height. But then the 58, and I'll put the picture in now, has a far thinner bezel and it has a domed sapphire crystal, whereas this has a flat crystal. So the bezel is thicker, and again, proportionally, it's a more modern aesthetic. So it is something that I do quite like. As I've mentioned earlier, this is just a more modern watch. There's no fake rivets. It is not as refined. It is unashamedly a diver's watch. There's no kind of faux aging of anything. It's just black and white with the red pop of text. It is a far more modern look than the 58, and again, as I've already mentioned, that is something that I just prefer, and I'm learning these things as I go through wearing various different watches, but my preference is definitely for the more modern style watches at the moment. If I wanted to buy a vintage looking watch, I'd buy a vintage watch personally, and that's what I'm kind of learning as I go through. If you want something to be what it is, buy what it is, right? So if you want a vintage watch, buy a vintage watch, and that's what I'm kind of starting to work out as you go through. I think the 58 blue was a kind of a reasonable mix between modern and vintage, but this is definitely my preference in terms of the styling. I think, as I've already mentioned, the hour plots and the snowflake hands work better on this watch. That obviously just flat sides. It just marries better than having circular hour markers and then the snowflake hands. So definitely a preference for that. Give me 1 second, sorry. I have had some more time to play with this in the light, and I will put in some pictures. And I do love the way the bezel is kind of more grey than black. It's very, very dark grey to a very light grey. And I will put some pictures in there. I did some pictures with my loupe. And you will see that in the sunlight. And I did manage to just about catch the sun ray effect on the dial as well. So I will put some pictures in just to show that. And I do like that because it just gives you a bit more visual interest to this watch. And I won't talk about the original Pelagos, we'll do that in a different video, but again, you'll hear the word versatile a lot, but that is quite important to me because I don't have a large collection. So it does mean I can wear this watch more and not have to worry, first world problems, but worry about going out somewhere and it looking stupid on my wrist, not fitting in, and just having to leave it in a hotel or something like that. So yeah, I will put those pictures in and you will see that having the bezel the way it is, not completely matte, having that light sunburst effect, it does give the watch a lot more versatility and it looks great. It means you do end up spending a lot more time looking at the watch than maybe you should, and maybe you do with other watches that don't have that kind of aesthetic. So the 58 blue dial specifically was very cold. I loved it, right? But it was very cold and there was nothing to it. It was just blue. So once you've looked at it in the sun once or through a loupe once, you're done. But with this, it's very different. You can stay there and look at the loupe and move it in the shade and into the sunlight and move it around and catch the light in different ways off the dial and the bezel. And it's a far more interesting watch visually to look at. Sorry, I think I just nudged my camera. Where else are we? I mentioned this in the original video. I do prefer the more pronounced teeth on the bezel. Not only does it make it easier to grip, and again, there weren't any problems with the other with my 58, but it does make this slightly easier to grip. I just prefer the look of it. But again, that plays into the two watches, with the 58 being more refined and this having a more tooly vibe, and that carries on to the excuse me, onto the crown as well. So it's got more prominent teeth on the crown, and that, as I say, plays into the more modern aesthetic of this watch and the more vintage look of the 58. Quite different, but again, this is just my preference. I think I will put a picture in of the loom. I think I put that in my original video. And yeah, this has got fantastic loom. I like the colour of this loom as well. I think on the 58 it was like a green loom, but this is the blue loom. Again, very much playing into the two aesthetics of the watches. So yeah, I keep saying the same things here, but just about different features. Tudor have done a fantastic job of that, of making those very specific, one model with all the modern features and aesthetics, and the Black Bay line with all the more vintage aesthetics, but obviously having a fully loomed bezel, it's really cool. My daughter likes it, so that's always a bonus as well. But yeah, the loom on both watches is fantastic, but having it on the bezel for me, it's just a cool thing. It does look very good, and I remember having that on my original Pelagos and really enjoying that feature too. Where else are we? I think I mentioned before the hour plots are too small. 3, 6, 9 and 12 are fine, but the other ones need to be a bit bigger to fill out that space. It does make the watch wear a little bit bigger, again, because you do have more black space, but my preference would be to have those markers a bit bigger, or maybe you can see the back end of all the hands are black, maybe make those white. Continue that white theme through just to fill the other side of the dial a bit. Be interesting to see what that looked like, but one of those two things, just to fill the dial a bit more, I think would have made the watch a bit more aesthetically pleasing. I absolutely love the red detailing of the Pelagos. Again, it's just something different. Everything's black and white with a little bit of grey on the bezel, and then boom, some red. And I really enjoy how that looks. It's kind of catches your eye, and it's just a cool thing to look at. What's that last bullet? Is it relevant? Sorry, 1 second. Okay, I think we'll move on to comfort and features. So that's just talking about subjectively the looks of the two watches. I think the last point is that there's no denying the 58 is a more versatile watch. Okay, if you have a small collection, you might prefer the 58. If you don't want something quite as rugged looking as this, and you don't like the dullness of the titanium, or if you're buying one watch, your first watch, the 58 is definitely the route I would go down, or recommend to people. I wouldn't go down that route now, having been there, but the one I would probably recommend to people. And as with anything, you need to try them on, but that is probably what I would recommend to people. So moving on to comfort and features, this is more of a blend. I'm not going to split this by 58 and Pelagos. I'm just going to talk about what I think about the comfort and the features. So the Pelagos 39 is a more comfortable watch. Okay, they're both extremely comfortable, but the fact that this is titanium makes it lighter, and the fact that you have the 5 micro adjustment points on the clasp at 2mm spread, I can get the perfect fit. For me, this is on the tightest or the closest micro adjustment point, and it's perfect for the winter. But when I get hot already, it's already too small on my wrist, and I've got 4 additional micro adjustment positions where I can move it out to. So when I get hot, I take it off and I move it out 1 or 2 depending on how hot I am. But with that capability, I can get the perfect fit. With the 58, as I mentioned, people are either buying Uncle Seiko half links, or they are like, well, no one, I think I was the only one that did it, but I had to get an extra hole drilled in the clasp by a professional watchmaker to make it comfortable. So this is, there is no question about it for me. This is the most comfortable watch of the two. As I just mentioned about the clasp, it is a far superior clasp. Not only, no, they both look good actually, to be fair. So looks wise, I don't really have an issue. They both look really nice. It is purely down to the micro adjustments. And I've shown that on my other videos, so if you're that keen, you can go and look at it. But actually, I'm just gonna quickly. The way you can really see it properly is if you pop out. So you can see, I'm just going to put that back in. So yeah, it's a better clasp, just for that feature, and that's what we are talking about in this particular segment of the video. Just trying to think about anything else, and it's not just the fact it's micro adjustable, it's the fact it's toolless. Having micro adjustment on a watch, and this is going to bug me if I get that Zenith, is that yes, it's great that you've got it, but if you need a toothpick or something to change it as your wrist swells or shrinks or whatever, it's just frustrating. So yeah, you've got 3 micro adjustment points on the 58, but they're not really that usable because you have to be somewhere with an appropriate something to use it. So that does bug me. And I think, if I'm being really honest, on a dive watch, I think that's kind of inexcusable. A dive watch at this price point should all have, even if it's got that limited micro adjustability, it should all be toolless. So that does bug me. So yeah, it is what it is. This does have the diver's extension on it, which in some people's minds might be a benefit. I'm never going to use it. I could do without it. With it, doesn't make a difference to me. So if you're talking about features, that might be a positive for some people if you're going to truly use this for going diving. Obviously, this has a fully loomed ceramic bezel, so the durability of that is going to be better than the aluminium bezel on 58, but some people might like the way the 58 eventually is going to age and it's going to fade, and they might like that and want that. Some people, like me, prefer to keep my watches in a more pristine condition, and as such, a ceramic bezel that is also fully loomed for me is a positive. Both of them have the same movement, so there's no real difference there. Same power reserve, same kind of accuracy, both COSC, both just as nice to wind and use. So no real winner there. I am yet to see how the hour plots on the bezel last on these. I think everyone watching this pretty much will know that the original Pelagos suffered with the loom plots falling out the bezel. Really hoping that doesn't happen on this. If it does, I'll do a video about that, obviously, and be completely honest about it. So yeah, we'll also have to see how that goes. But in conclusion, for me, overall, this watch takes it. This is the one that, as I had the opportunity to buy, I could have bought back the 58, or I could have bought this. This is the one I chose for all the reasons mentioned above. The main one, and the easiest way to mention that, is that it's just more modern. It has a more modern feel, a more modern aesthetic, more modern capabilities. So that is why, for me, this is the watch I did choose, and I'm really pleased with it so far. It's still very early days. Like I say, I'll do a video in a few months updating to see how I still feel about it then. And I think the other thing I would say is, if you don't think it's that versatile, go and look at it, because it is more versatile than you would think, with the small changes that they've made to it to make it more modern from the original Pelagos. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully that helps people. And as always, if you've got any questions, please just let me know.